Good morning. Thank you for coming. Great day to do a heavy weather meeting when it's not the greatest weather out there, right? So I'm Corey Dibble. I'm the Director of Safety Security here at Port Canaveral. Again, thank you for coming. Packed crowd. We have the Harbor Safety Committee meeting after. This is a great workshop, great presentations by the National Weather Service all the way through the Coast Guard. So I'd like to pass it off to our CEO and Port Director, Captain John Murray, for some welcoming remarks.
Morning, everybody. It's that time of year again. It's hard to believe we're in hurricane season already today. So we got something brewing out in the Gulf of Mexico. Not expected to be a storm, but it's going to give us a wet weekend from what it looks like. So this is very important to us. I think it's very important to all of you. And you know, every year we try to set expectations. Every storm is different. Last year we had 2 different storms and coming from different directions, and we took different actions based on the direction of the storm and anticipated weather. So sometimes that may be confusing when the event is actually taking place, but that's the reason for having these advanced meetings, to try and set everyone's expectations and make sure there's a clear line of communication for everyone at the time of the event. So welcome, thank you for coming, and I'm going to kick it off to Corey and Coast Guard and take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Murray. So as in the past, we have this video is going to be, or this presentation is going to be recorded. We like to post it on our social media and our website. That way we can refer to this. You can refer to this, any information that is presented during an event, and for those that can't make it. So we want to start off every presentation with the National Weather Service. We want to do a look ahead of what is that 2023 season looking like? What does the National Weather Service know? What are they predicting as far as storms? So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Will and Matthew with the National Weather Service to give us an outlook of the season.
Thanks, Corey. Appreciate it. Here we are, June 1st, 2023, at the start of the 2023 Atlantic hurricane season. There's a lot to talk about over the next 25 minutes, so we're going to get started. Matt and I are going to kind of tag team this presentation today. We've got plenty of things to talk about, including what you see here on the screen, who we work for in terms of our agency, a little bit of a refresher when it comes to tropical storms and hurricanes. We want to talk about the basics before we give you the forecast, and then talk about the products and services available to us from the National Hurricane Center. I talk loud. I'm from Jersey. Hopefully you guys can all hear me, okay? There's some lesson learned from 2022, so before we give you the forecast for 2023, let's take a look back. Let's take a step back. We're not trying to re-trigger your PTSD from last year, because we have it as well, right? It was a long season, and there are a lot of lessons learned to talk about. So Matt is going to start us off with an overview of the National Weather Service.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Matt Volkmar. I'm the Science Operations Officer at National Weather Service Melbourne, and we'll get right into the talk here. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the National Weather Service. We run 168 operational units across the country. You can see on this map most of our local forecast offices there in red, and also our national centers as well across that map. We have about 4,500 employees across the Weather Service. 86% of those are in the field offices, like your local office here in Melbourne. And we also issue 1.5 million forecasts and 50,000 warnings a year. So we're very busy issuing those forecasts and warnings for you all. And again, we have 122 local forecast offices across the country. You can see this map here in Florida. We have the local forecast office in Melbourne. We also have a forecast office over in Tampa, Miami, Key West, Jacksonville, Tallahassee, and Mobile covers the western panhandle of Florida. So you've got about 7 forecast offices covering the state. And we also have local offices as well all across the country. Each of these offices is staffed with about 20 to 25 employees. We've got a full staff of meteorologists on duty, and we work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even Christmas and holidays. We have at least 2 forecasters on duty around the clock. You can see our office here in Melbourne, down by Croton Road, just north of the airport, our operations floor there, and our Doppler radar is right out in our parking lot in that down at the Melbourne office. So what is our mission? Our mission is to provide weather, water, and climate forecasts, warnings, and impact decision support services for the protection of life and property. That's our main mission. And we want to make sure everyone is prepared and to take those protective actions when warnings are issued. So as far as all the myriad of things we do, we have a pretty large observational program collecting radar, satellite data, buoy data. Also, there's an upper air station up at Cape Canaveral, just north of here at the Air Force Station, doing 2 launches of weather balloons a day, getting atmospheric conditions for the forecast models. I'd say we also issue those watches and warnings, forecasts, and we provide decision support for our key public safety partners as well. So this is just all the watches and warnings the Weather Service issues. You can see here we've got severe weather warnings, winter weather. In the tropical realm, we're issuing tropical storm, hurricane, storm surge, extreme wind warnings. And you can also see there in the lower right-hand corner of the slide, a lot of those warnings are pushed out to those wireless emergency alerts on your cell phones, but you should always have a second way as well to receive those warnings. And as far as getting information from the National Weather Service, you can go to weather.gov for the main forecast page. And if you click on East Central Florida there, or where your local area is, you'll get into the National Weather Service Melbourne office where we have forecast warnings and a lot of information for you there. So I'm going to hand it back to Will to get into some information on tropical cyclones.
Thanks, Matt. One thing about those wireless emergency alerts, we were not the one that sent you that wireless emergency alert at 4:45 in the morning, okay? That was a mistake done by the state. We hope that you did not turn those warnings off on your phone after that incident, okay? It was a one-off incident, but if you chose to shut it off, you will not receive those wireless emergency alerts. It's critical that you have multiple ways to receive those watch warning information, so please, please ensure that you at least try and get that turned back on. So, here we are talking about tropical cyclones. I know most of you guys are mariners. I know you guys know a lot about this stuff already, but there's some factoids that I want to talk to you about so that you understand the threat as it evolves, of course, over the course of the 6-month period from June through November. Again, tropical systems or tropical cyclones is the generic term that we use for all things tropical storms and hurricanes. In the Atlantic and Pacific Basin, we refer to them as hurricanes and tropical storms, but in other parts of the world, they're called different things. Nonetheless, the majority of the systems that we see here in the Atlantic and Caribbean Basin originate as tropical disturbances that come off the west coast of Africa. In fact, about 80% of systems that impact the United States originate as easterly waves that come off of the west coast of Africa. As they interact with the warm, unstable conditions due to those warm water temperatures over the Atlantic, they organize into rotating bands of showers and thunderstorms around a common area of low pressure. And as they get organized enough, they turn from a tropical disturbance to a tropical depression. And then if the conditions are favorable, they go up in scale to a tropical storm and a hurricane. Hurricanes, of course, are ranked by Category 1 through Category 5. Here in the eastern, western Atlantic and eastern Pacific, we refer to these systems as tropical storms and hurricanes, but in different parts of the world, they're called typhoons off of Asia and cyclones south of the equator near Australia. Tropical cyclones come in all shapes and sizes, and the threats associated with them aren't correlated to the size of the storm, right? We look back to 2004. Hurricane Charlie was a very small, compact storm, but it packed a punch, okay? So keep in mind that the systems do come in all shapes and sizes, and the threat does change depending on the situation at hand, but they are ranked by their 1-minute average wind speed, or what we call sustained wind speed. So when winds are less than 38 miles per hour, and the system is organized enough to be considered a tropical cyclone, we call that a tropical depression. Once those wind speeds get in excess of around 39 miles per hour, up to about 73, we consider that a tropical storm. That's when it's designated with a name. Tropical depressions are numbered. Tropical storms get names, A, B, C, D, and so on. Once you get those sustained wind speeds around the center of the circulation with at least 74 mile per hour winds, you've got yourself a hurricane. And then again, hurricanes are ranked and categorized from 1 through 5. Once you get a Category 3 or higher, you have yourself a major hurricane. That's with winds in excess of 110 miles per hour. This is the scale, the Saffir-Simpson scale. That again ranks hurricanes based off of winds, but winds are not the only threat, right? There's lots of other hazards that come with hurricanes, and just because you have a Category 1 storm doesn't necessarily mean, oh, it's just a Category 1 storm, right? There's lots of other threats that we have to be familiar with, but the one thing that I want to talk about is the damage potential associated with hurricanes. It's not that a Category 2 hurricane is twice as strong as a Category 1 hurricane, right? It's an exponential growth such that a Category 2 hurricane brings with it 10 times the damage potential of a Category 1. A Category 3, 50 times the damage potential of a Category 1, and so on and so on. Brevard County, relatively speaking, has been quote-unquote lucky. We've dodged the proverbial bullet several times. No, we don't dodge those bullets because of some magical shield that KSC and NASA has put up on our behalf. Our day will come, and we need to be prepared for experiencing a potential Category 2, 3, or 4 landfall here in Brevard County. We have only ever experienced strong tropical storm force and borderline Category 1 hurricane conditions in this county over the past at least 30 to 40 years. Hurricane Erin was probably the closest thing that came to a Category 1 hurricane impacting our area. But of course, we did see Category 1-like impacts in the 2004 hurricane season. Matthew was the closest thing that we've ever come to seeing a Category 2 or Category 3 landfall here in Brevard County. But again, we dodged that bullet. Major hurricanes account for only 1 in 5 landfalls in the United States, yet they account for 83% of all damage. So again, it's not that these hurricanes just double in impacts, it's an exponential growth. Of course, all tropical cyclones can produce each of these floodings. The biggest one, the most concerning to us, the one that can lead to the greatest loss of life, of course, is storm surge. And we have to be familiar with that here, of course, due to our operations along the coastline and here at Port Canaveral. But they bring a myriad of threats, including strong winds, flooding, and tornadoes as well. Tropical cyclones can bring a combination or just one of these events. And again, it's not necessarily tied to the size of the storm. Now, here we are at the start of the Atlantic hurricane season, started June 1. Why do we classify June 1 through November 30th as the hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin? That's because that time period encompasses about 97% of all tropical cyclones. But notice how June and July are relatively quiet compared to the rest of the season. In fact, it's not until August that we really ramp up conditions due to those water temperatures continuing to climb. This chart that you see here represents how many storms have passed within 150 miles of that blue point, which finds itself somewhere between the Osceola and Polk County border. Why do I draw a line of 150 nautical miles around that point? Well, because hurricanes aren't singular points, right? It doesn't matter if the center of the storm moves over your location. It's about where the impacts from the storm occur, and they can occur hundreds of miles from the center. So here we have hurricanes that have passed within 150 miles during the month of June, going all the way back to 1850, a 170-year period. We've had 2 hurricanes pass within 150 miles of that blue point. There's July, 5 hurricanes. Relatively speaking, over a 170-year period, that's not that many, right? And then August comes along. A lot more from the south and east, and the colors get a little more vivid, so you start to see a little bit more Category 2, 3, and 4 on the map. And then there's September. A child took a bowl of spaghetti and chucked it on the screen, right? Lots of vivid colors from Category 3s, 4s, and 5s approaching from the south and east. 27 hurricanes over the course of a 170-year period within 150 miles of that specific point. And then you think October, oh, we start to, quiet things down here. No. We've actually had more hurricanes pass within 150 miles of that point in October than any other time of the year. So the threat does not diminish in October. In fact, for the state of Florida, we've had more landfalls in the month of October than any other month. So let's keep that in mind. Particularly, though, the southwest coast. We start to see systems develop in the Caribbean and move from the southwest to the north and east. However, we can look back to 2005, Hurricane Wilma, right? And that was an example of an October hurricane. And then Matthew, that late season, late October system that passed just about 50 miles east of here. Got, again, as much damage as we saw. We were very, very lucky that the eye did not come a little bit further west. And then November, it basically shuts down. Except last year, right? Normally, I don't have to talk about hurricanes on my birthday, November 8th. But this one decided to ruin my birthday last year, and I was on calls with all of you guys last year. So that was fun. So I'll throw it back to Matt for tropical products and services from the National Hurricane Center and National Weather Service.
All right, we're going to talk about the tropical products and services we issue from the National Weather Service here. Thing I'd like to mention is that we do have these national centers that also provide the big picture as far as our products and services. You can see here National Hurricane Center is where we're getting most of our information, tropical information, as far as the latest on each storm. The Weather Prediction Center, they're looking very closely at rainfall across the entire country, putting out excessive rainfall outlooks. Storm Prediction Center in Norman, Oklahoma is looking at that tornado threat on a daily basis, including during times of tropical cyclones. And the National Water Center is now spinning up in Huntsville, Alabama, and they're looking at river level forecasts across the entire country. So those are the national centers, and then we have the local National Weather Service forecast offices that are looking at the local scale weather for our communities. As far as looking at the tropical products and services, there's a timeline of products that we issue. If you look out about 6 to 7 days from a potential threat, we now have the tropical weather outlook that goes out 7 days. That's issued by the National Hurricane Center. As we get into the days 3 and 5 period. Here we've got additional products that are available on the National Hurricane Center website, including the potential track forecast for any active systems, wind speed probability graphics, time of arrival graphics, and also the key messages with each advisory package from the National Hurricane Center. On days 1 and 2, there's additional products from your local forecast office, including hurricane threat and impact graphics. And also from the National Hurricane Center, you're going to start to see storm surge maps available as well, and those tropical storm watches and warnings. And then on the day of impact, you're going to see a lot more local warning information from your local office. We've got forecasters monitoring the radar very closely during hurricanes, and you will be seeing those tornado warnings, extreme wind warnings for very strong winds, category 3 or higher, with systems that make landfall, and also flash flood warnings for those hurricanes that produce torrential rainfall. This is another product from the National Hurricane Center. As I said, the 7-day graphical tropical weather outlook is available every 6 hours on their website. This product has been expanded out from a 5-day forecast to 7 days for this year. So you're going to see the potential areas where tropical cyclones may form on this map. It's again available every 6 hours from the National Hurricane Center. Here we've got an example image with the storm down in the central Atlantic, and you can see that large area there, just basically showing where tropical cyclones may develop in the next 7 days. You're likely to see a little bit larger areas on this map to take into account those forecasts out 7 days. Another product I'm sure you're all familiar with from the National Hurricane Center is the potential track forecast map of all the active hurricanes and tropical storms. This was a map from Hurricane Ian showing when it was in the southeast Gulf of Mexico and the track forecast up toward Florida. See, at this time, it was forecast to make landfall on the southwest Florida coast, come across the peninsula, and then move up into the Carolinas and Georgia. One thing you can notice on this map is the M's. That's when the National Hurricane Center is forecasting a major hurricane. The H's are forecast at category 1 or 2 hurricane strength, and the S's are tropical storm strength. And the D on the map up in South Carolina is a tropical depression status. So one thing you want to look at on this map is the actual cone. And that's where the most likely track forecast is for a active tropical cyclone. 2/3 of the time, the track forecast should remain within that cone. But as you can see on this map, at the initial time, the tropical storm force winds extend well outside the track forecast cone for the center. So one thing we do like to mention is that the impacts can occur well outside that cone. So this is good to see where the systems are tracking, but know that those impacts can occur well outside the cone. A lot of times to the right of the track is where we see those intense impacts from wind and storm surge. This is track forecast errors from the National Hurricane Center. You see a lot of squiggly lines on that map going from upper right down to the lower left. But basically this is showing that the track forecast improvements have been getting better over time from the National Hurricane Center. You can see a day 5 forecast there. Back in the early 2000s was about 500 miles. We've got that track forecast error on day 5 down to about 210 miles. So we've made over a 50% improvement in the track forecast errors. And you can see even at the days 2 in green and day 1 in red there on the bottom, we've been making gradual improvements in those track forecasts.
Before Matt moves on, I just want to comment on this graphic. 24 hours out, the average error is still 40 to 50 miles. So that's why we don't like to talk in terms of expectations. Here's what we can expect. The fact is, we can't tell you whether the system, 50 miles, is from here to Orlando, or from here to offshore, 40 to 50 miles. Think about that, how that can potentially impact your forecast. So even out, 1 day, we're not able to tell you exactly where that center of the system is going to go. So we don't like to speak in deterministic terms. Here's what we expect. What we like to speak in is in terms of, here's what you need to be prepared for. Given all the uncertainty in the forecast, here's what you and your partners need to be prepared for. Okay, so please keep that in mind. There's still a lot of uncertainty. Even in this day and age, there's still a lot of uncertainty with these hurricane forecasts. And this is just the track. This doesn't speak to the intensity of the system. That's a whole nother conversation that we could talk about for 30 minutes, but we don't have the time for that. Okay.
Okay, one thing that Will was alluding to is leveraging those probabilities, and the National Hurricane Center produces tropical storm 50 knot, and hurricane force wind speed probability maps for each advisory cycle. So this is an advisory from Hurricane Ian, I believe, as it was down in the Caribbean. And you can see on the tropical storm wind force wind probability map here at this advisory cycle that we had pretty high probabilities of seeing those tropical storm force winds approaching the west coast of Florida. So, basically this is looking at taking the official National Weather Service or Hurricane Center forecast track for a system and running 1,000 realistic scenarios around that forecast track, changing the intensity, size of the system, and then coming up with those tropical storm and hurricane force wind probabilities. So this is very useful as far as looking at those key thresholds that you may have when you may be closing operations for the port area as well, looking at the timing as well when we can expect those. And the National Hurricane Center also provides these time of arrival graphics. Here, we have one version is the earliest reasonable time of arrival, and then we also have the most likely arrival of tropical storm force winds for any advisory. So you can see the earliest reasonable time is the time, 10% chance that tropical storm force winds will arrive before that time. So this is the graphic with the highest safety margin as far as making sure all those preparations are completed. The most likely arrival time is equal chances of those tropical storm force winds arriving before or after the time listed. And this is basically if the forecast is perfect, and we know that the track of these systems can change, the speed and the size and intensity can change from advisory to advisory. But this gives us a basic, some basic information on time of arrival for those tropical storm force winds. And you can also see you've also got the probability information as well paired with these graphics. From the National office in Melbourne, we also produce hurricane threat and impact graphics. These are local graphics that describe the hazards of wind, flooding, storm surge, and tornado, and the relative risks. So you're looking here at these graphics. I believe this was Hurricane Irma back in, as it was approaching the west coast of Florida. You can see here on the wind threat, it had extreme threat for the west coast area generally, but you can see across the entire peninsula, we had a high threat for flooding rainfall, and then you can see the tornado threat as well was moderate. And we did see a lot of tornadoes with Hurricane Irma. So this is something basically to look at to give you a sense of the potential for these hazards as the system is moving toward our area. So this is an added slide for this talk. I did want to mention that we do slosh modeling at the National Weather Service, and this is basically taking categories of storms moving from different directions and speeds toward different areas and coming up with the maximum surge that would be modeled. So here, for maximum, for a Cat 2 storm on the upper left, this is the maximum surge that was modeled from the slosh modeling group to see what areas would be inundated. And you can see for the maximum for surge for a Cat 2, you see a lot of areas in blue with 3 feet or less of surge. Right in the beachfront, though, you can see 6 feet of surge. Maximum surge in a Cat 3, and then you go up to Cat 4 and Cat 5, and you can see once we get up into a Cat 4 or Cat 5 situation, if we get the right storm size, large storm, moving slowly right on shore, you can see we could have pretty catastrophic surge scenarios. But usually Cat 2 and lower are those lower end events, but I did want to show you that we have done preseason modeling to take a look at categories of storms and try to find out what would be the maximum worst case scenario as far as surge for any given area. Last thing I'll end with here is the wireless emergency alerts. Of course, these are pushed to your cell phone. You get tornado warnings and other alerts, but in the tropical realm, we have hurricane warnings, storm surge warnings, and extreme wind warnings that are pushed to your cell phone when those alerts are initially issued. So when you first go under a hurricane warning or storm surge warning, you should see that initial alert on your cell phone to let you know that that hazard is now in effect. And I'm going to hand it over to Will for a look back at 2022.
So last year, this was the forecast that was issued for the 2022 hurricane season. 2022, May of 2022 is when they issue their national, May is when they issue, the National Hurricane Center and the Climate Prediction Center issues their hurricane season outlook. And this was last year's forecast. Last year called for an above normal hurricane season. Here's what actually happened. 14 named storms, 8 hurricanes, 2 major hurricanes. Here's an average season, 14, 7, and 3. By the numbers, that looks pretty average to me. Okay, by the numbers, 2022 will be looked back on as an average season, yet from an impacts perspective, it was anything but, right? So you keep that in mind as we look ahead at 2023, or when you start to hear of these forecasts being issued by different entities. Whether you remember or not, last year we had 3 systems that impacted the area. You might have forgotten about the one in June, considering what happened in September in Nicole, but we did have Tropical Storm Alex that developed off our coastline, although its impacts were relatively minimal. Everyone's going to remember, of course, what impacted the state, and that was Major Hurricane Ian, and then the coastal impacts in particular from Hurricane Nicole. This is Major Hurricane Ian. It will forever be remembered as a water storm. 15 to 20 inches of rain fell across a large portion of our area of responsibility. You see it outlined in black there. It will be remembered as a flooding event for us here in East Central Florida. And then it set the stage for potential significant to major coastal erosion and coastal impacts because of what we saw happen just a couple of months later in November when Nicole made landfall. A friendly reminder that the flooding rainfall threat is not tied to the category of a storm. It has to do with the forward motion of the storm. The slower the moving storm, the greater the rainfall potential, and that's what we saw in Ian. Nicole rainfall totals were only about 1/3 of what we saw in Ian, and wind speeds were about half, despite the fact that it did make landfall along the Indian River County coastline. Most of the strongest winds actually impacted Brevard County right along the immediate coastline. But even then, it was mainly strong tropical storm force wind gusts. This chart shows rainfall distribution from 3 significant storms that have led to rainfall flooding here in Brevard County. Tropical Storm Faye, quote unquote, just a tropical storm, yet it dumped 28 inches of rain here in the county. Hurricane Irma, a significant storm, no doubt, but dumped 15 to 20 inches of rain on the east side of the storm. And then we just had Major Hurricane Ian. Notice the rainfall distribution. It's changed with every storm as well. The heaviest rainfall for Faye fell along the track. Irma fell to the east of the track. And then Ian fell to the north of the track. So really being able to tell you exactly where the heaviest rain is going to fall can be difficult until we're only about 2 to 3 days out from the storm. But when it comes to tropical rainfall flooding, the category simply doesn't matter. So from a 2022 perspective, here's a recap. By the books, by the numbers, 2022 was an average season. 14 named storms. In an average season, we would expect 14 named storms. And yet, it was anything but. It was the costliest season on record for the state of Florida and the 9th deadliest for the state of Florida. Another thing is, watch reading into trends early in the season. I don't know if you guys remember this, but we had the A, B, and the C storm in June of last year. And everybody's like, holy crap, we've had 3 named storms in June. This is going to be an incredibly busy season. And then we didn't get Bubkis in July and August. And then everybody was saying the exact opposite. These damn forecasters, they don't know what they're talking about. Above normal season, my butt, we haven't had any storms in June or July and August. And then what happened? September made up for that, right? So keep that in mind when you try and read into early season trends. Fact is, not a lot of storms are expected to occur in June or July. Remember I showed you that chart? What you need to focus on is August, September, and October, okay? So what's 2023 look like? This is this season. Not a whole lot that we can glean from this forecast, right? Forecasters favor a near normal season, which I told you the numbers, right? 14, 7, and 3. 14, 8, and 3, 14, 7, and 3. Oh, there they are. Average season, 14, 7, and 3. They see the range of the forecast, 12 to 17 named storms, 5 to 9, major hurricanes, 1 to 4. That's a pretty big range, right? The fact is, it doesn't matter what the forecast is for. It only takes 1. In the case of 2022, it only takes 2. Okay? 1992, Hurricane Andrew made landfall in the southeast coast of Florida. It was one of only 7 named storms that year. We had 7 storms in 1992, and the A storm turned out to be the only major hurricane of the year. Everyone looks back at 1992 and looks at the numbers and goes, wow, that's a quiet season. You think the people of South Florida call that a quiet season? No, absolutely not. We need to be prepared for whatever Mother Nature has to throw at us, regardless of what we try and forecast this early in the season. There's a reason these forecasts are issued. There is skill in it, and it gathers everyone in the room together so that we can talk about this exact thing, right? So have your hurricane preparedness plans in place before the start of the hurricane season, and if you need to use the hurricane season outlook, do so. One of the reasons why we have so much uncertainty is because of this right here. For the past 3 years, we've had colder than normal water temperatures in the Eastern Pacific, but now those water temperatures are changing, and we're transitioning into an El Nino. Typically, during El Nino summers, we get lower than normal hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin. That's because more storms occur in the Pacific, and then that takes away from the possibility of having additional storms in the Atlantic. That's the overall gist of it. That's the basic idea behind it. However, this year, this is what water temperatures look like in the Atlantic and the Caribbean. Oranges and yellows being above normal water temperatures, blue being below normal. I'm seeing a whole lot more yellow and orange on there, right? So there's a lot more energy for the storms to feed off this year where they develop. So El Nino would tell us, hey, we might actually see less storms this year, and yet the water temperatures in the Pacific tell us, maybe not. Maybe it's actually going to be a little bit more busy. So the fact is, this is going to lead to a lot of uncertainty in this year's forecast. But at the end of the day, like I told you, it only takes one storm impacting your community. And those forecasts can't tell you anything about where the systems are expected to go. They can give you a general idea of whether they're going to be a below normal season or an above normal season. But the fact is, the science isn't there yet for us to tell you this far out what portions of the coastline are going to be impacted. For those of you in the External Affairs Department or social media PIOs, if you guys follow us on social media pages, we do develop a lot of social media graphics like what you see here. These are key preparedness graphics that we put up during the preseason, and then as the storm begins to develop and potentially approach our coastline, we have all these different graphics. Please feel free to share any of this information that we post on our social media. If you have additional questions, please reach out to me after today. So wrapping it all up, please remember to use seasonal tropical forecasts as a reminder to have your hurricane preparedness plan in place before the start of the season. Competing factors like what I told you earlier about El Nino developing and the fact that we have water temperatures that are warmer than usual in the Atlantic is only going to add to uncertainty into this year's forecast. Hence why you didn't see the National Hurricane Center kind of commit to one of those categories, whether this season is going to be below normal, near normal, or above normal. But overall, it does seem that this year's seasonal forecast does indicate that conditions are expected to be near normal, around what I was saying earlier. An average season is 14 storms, 7 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes, give or take plus or minus 1. But we'll see how this year shapes out. At the end of the day, for your preparedness plans, it doesn't matter. Because what? It only takes one. We appreciate the time. We know we went a little over. Hopefully we kept you guys engaged.
So we really don't have time. If there is 1 or 2 questions, we can pass it around. If not, hold it to the end, and we'll answer it as we usually do.
We're going to stay through 10 o'clock, and I know there's a little break session, so if you want to come up and talk, that's
Perfect.
fine.
Thank you both. Great presentation. Thank you. So now I'd like to call up local Coast Guard Commander John Donino and Lieutenant from Sector Jacksonville, Kyle Wyford, to go over the Coast Guard's heavy weather plan. We did a presentation back in March focused on vessels and evacuations and Annex H, which they'll go over, but we wanted to do this for the entire port community as we do this every year. So, John.
Thank you, appreciate it. And I just want to thank everybody for coming here today, and Lieutenant Wyford, our heavy weather officer at Sector Jacksonville, for coming down here and giving a presentation. After that national weather, I'm highly motivated right now. Over the past several months, I've depleted my son's Chef Boyardee supply from last season, and so I need to get that restocked. But, you know, just to hammer it home, be prepared. It's really important to be prepared. The Coast Guard, as you all know, we will shut down the port in a heavy weather scenario. We're not trying to be mean. We're not trying to anger anybody or cause loss of revenue. We're just trying to protect all of the different port entities and this extremely important asset here at Canaveral Port Authority and the surrounding area. So it's important to understand what some of those those wickets are that lead to that event, but also understand the Coast Guard doesn't shut down the port without an extreme coordination between all the port stakeholders and input from everybody. Leading up to a port closure, we are highly engaged with all the different stakeholders, and it's not necessarily just a Coast Guard decision, but it is a joint decision here in Canaveral on how we come to a port closure event. And also, I just ask for everybody's patience as the Coast Guard and all the other port stakeholders work to reopen a port. Even though it might look beautiful, it'll be sunny, clear skies, perfect day after a hurricane or heavy weather event, and the port is still closed. It's because the Coast Guard and all the other stakeholders that are working to reopen the port are actively engaged. And sometimes we can't even get out. As an example, even though it might look beautiful outside, offshore conditions to do ATON checks don't allow for vessels to get underway and do those ACE to navigations checks. So even though it might be beautiful, we can't say whether the port is appropriate for a 35-foot draft vessel to come in safely or not. So I just ask for your patience as all of the stakeholders work to open up the port in a post-heavy weather event. And other than that, I'll pass it off to Lieutenant Wyford for his presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. So my name is Kyle Wyford. I am up at Sector Jacksonville, and I'm an emergency management specialist up there, and one of my main jobs is to maintain the heavy weather plan. So that's what I'm going to do for you today, is just give you a brief overview as to what is within this plan, and so you guys can see kind of behind the curtain as to what the Coast Guard's doing in these events. All right, so what's all in this plan? So in the plan, it's going to have things for you guys as port stakeholders and things you guys should be doing, as well as the things that the Coast Guard are going to be doing. Our area of responsibility for the Sector Jacksonville is as far as goes north to southern Georgia, which is like St. Mary's, Kings Bay, Navy Base area, all the way down here to Canaveral. We have 3 ports within that AOR. That's area of responsibility, if you aren't familiar, sorry. Is you got Fernandina Beach, we've got Jacksonville, and then here in Canaveral. In the plan, we're going to have hurricane conditions as well as port conditions. The main 2 difference between that is a port condition is for the port and you guys as stakeholders as to what's happening with the actual port. The hurricane conditions is what we use internally with the Coast Guard. We also have checklists and things that we are doing to prepare, and that's what we are going against hurricane conditions, and port conditions is more or less for the stakeholders. It goes over port preparedness, what we are doing internally, and then like our actions and operations that we're doing pre-storm and then post-storm. So again, you can have access to this plan. You can actually see everything that we're doing. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me and I can explain it. How you can access this plan is at Homeport. Most of you are probably familiar with Homeport. If you go there, you go to the Port Directory tab, find Jacksonville, and then you'll have the contingency plans. There'll be a heavy weather plan as well as a remaining port request. Port preparedness. For you as stakeholders, the main chapter within this plan is going to be Chapter 4. It kind of talks about port conditions and what you guys should be seeing and preparing for when a heavy weather event starts coming. Does anyone in here own or operate a vessel 500 gross tons or larger? 1. 2. All right. Are you guys familiar with Annex H's and stuff? I would assume so. So I'm going to go quickly over that part because you guys are probably very familiar with that. So port conditions, here's the big part. So condition 4 is we set during hurricane season. So that's today. We're in port condition 4. All that is a heightened level of awareness that we know that there's preparations, very basic preparations that you guys are doing because the storm could come out of nowhere and affect us. So we're just in a heightened level of awareness. Condition whiskey is going to start happening when sustained tropical storm force winds are 72 hours out from affecting us. The key takeaway there is tropical storm force winds. That's 39 miles an hour. So if you have a hurricane at 74 miles an hour, it's not when 74 mile an hour winds or whatever level of that hurricane is. When those winds get here, it's tropical storm force winds. And then the size of the storm could be very large. So those outer bands could be the sustained tropical storm force winds. So if you're looking at those models that the Weather Service sends out, and those funnels, that's the eye of the storm. The eye of the storm is where they're reaching. So the slides that they presented and talked about the sustained tropical storm force winds, that's the slide you really need to be looking at, because that's what's affecting the port, not the eye of the storm in that funnel. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And then that's 72 miles out. And then there's 48 hours with X-ray, and then Yankee is 24 hours. So Yankee is when the port starts to close. There are restrictions, and that's because there's some like operations. No one can come in, but you can still offload, correct? And then everything has to stop 6 hours before you get to Zulu. And then everything shuts down. And the 500 gross tons, you can remain in port. There's requests that you're gonna submit for that. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, so here's a little bit more in depth. Again, this is all in the plan if you want to read more into it. It's what I said. 72 hours is when we're setting whiskey. Yankee is the big thing because that's now it's closed, but there are some restrictions. And then Zulu, it's done. It is absolutely done. There's nothing coming in, out, or any operations even happening within that. I want to let everyone know that when it comes to setting these conditions, like Ms. Danino said, the captain of the port, which is Captain Spino Young up there where I'm at in Jacksonville, she does not take this lightly. When we set these conditions, we have to, it's a huge risk-based decision that we have to make because we're affecting commerce, we're affecting all of you guys, we're affecting your clients and your marinas and your industry. And so there's a port coordination team that happens. Some of you are probably part of that committee, but they are meeting on a regular basis every single day when we suspect that a storm might affect us. And they are working together to determine when we should be setting these conditions so that you guys can operate and it doesn't affect you as much as possible. So understand it's the hardest decision, because if you do not set these port conditions and something bad happens, now it falls on her. If she does set the conditions and nothing happens, and then you guys are affected, now it's on her. So trust me, this is not a decision that she takes very lightly. And do you guys want to make a plug for the port coordination team, or we're good with that? Kind of like what happens? Yeah. Or, I'll talk about it. Okay.
Yeah, so real quick, I'll talk about it probably in my presentation as well, but the port coordination is almost everybody in this room that has a stakeholder representation of the port. A lot of vessels, a lot of the facilities. We get together when a storm is approaching. We talk once, if not twice a day, and we go over what our concerns are, what are our issues, what are our operations going forward, what do we need to continue, and what can we shut down. And then Captain of the Port is going to take that with Commander Danino's direction as well and go into a risk-based model to determine when we should shut down. And we're doing this call with the conditions. As you can see, a lot of you are familiar with landside, Brevard County Emergency Management, landside evacuations. We do both. We have landside here, but this is for the water side. And that is something that I'll discuss in my presentation, how there is a difference between water side evacuation and landside. Anything else? And just real quickly, we operate under unified command here. Again, I'll go into that in my presentation, but you have everybody here. You have the Coast Guard, Canaveral Fire Rescue, Brevard County Sheriff's Office, CBP in the back, and CPA. We don't do this in a vacuum locally either. This is everybody checks their ego at the door. We get together, we go early, we activate, we discuss what our operations, our objectives are for the storm and how we can quickly respond, because we want to get open. Everybody in this area wants to get open and return to normalcy as quick as possible. You have anything additional? All right.
All right, so I'll scan through this. So this is just for your awareness for these big vessels that are all out here. Just to understand that they're not just hanging out because they want to. They have very detailed plans that are approved by the captain of the port and the local Coast Guard, and that they have very in-depth plans to stay here when something like that happens. There's Annex H, so this is the form that they have to submit to us, and this is how they request to stay in port. Layup vessels, not really, that doesn't affect us here, right? All right, remain in port, so this is the point of contacts up there for the two people you probably already know. Your plans had to have been in by May 1st for the hurricane season. All right, so evacuation considerations. Is it Department of Transportation for the state in here? So is this still accurate? 12 hours prior to sustained winds, the locks are shutting down? Or Lisa?
That
That would be that's the Army Corps. But yeah.
Army Corps? Is that still accurate, Lisa? Or? Okay, 35 miles an hour now. We'll update that. Thank you. All right, and then post-storm assessments. So, like Mr. Danino says, once that storm passes through, our top priorities are life, safety of property, and getting this port back open so that you guys can all operate. So if it's sunny, no, and you might not see us, but we are all out there working with our OGAs and our partners. We're trying to get this port open. We're doing assessments of the facilities, bridges, the ATON, which is aids to navigation, because we want to make sure that the vessels have had those aids that they use to come in and out of the port. And we're just, we're doing assessments, and we're going to open that port as soon as possible. Any questions? That was very brief. But again, that plan is all online. If you want to go through it, it might put you to sleep, but just scan through it. There's really good information that might pertain to you. And you can also use some of it if you have to create a plan for your organization as well. And if you have any questions or concerns about it, please reach out to me, and I can help you create a plan for yourself. Any questions?
And I do want to note that we gave a very in-depth presentation on Annex H and remain in port requests to the vessel community in April, which was very well received, and we'll look at potentially doing that forward. So we wanted to make sure we didn't go over the information and take too much time, but really focus on what pertains to more of the people in the room for today. So thank you for that presentation. Next up is Deputy Chief for Canal Fire Rescue, Chief Quinn, who's going to go over more landside operations and how Canal Fire Rescue is an important aspect of Unified Command. Chief.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks to everybody for coming out. Like Corey said, Chris Quinn, Canaveral Fire Rescue. Our presentation is pretty short and sweet. Gets to the point. But to the National Weather Service's point, I was here for Faye, and we did over 20 water rescues for Faye, and it was just a tropical storm. So don't let just because it's a storm, a hurricane or a tropical storm fool you. 72 hours pre-landfall. This is where we prepare our station apparatus, make sure everything's fueled, ready to go. We're always talking with CPA, Unified Command. 48 hours pre-landfall. We work 24-hour shifts, so this is where we kind of break up our shifts and start assigning people and doing different things like that. 24 hours, trying to get people out of here. I know over the past couple of years, more and more people are staying, makes our job a little bit more difficult. So, if you're told to evacuate, please evacuate. It helps us out. Pre-storm. This is where our stations are staffed, and we just pretty much hunker down now. Now we do 12-hour operational shifts. We definitely got to get rest. I've been here 4, 5, 6 days. So this is where we kind of, want to catch up on our rest and get everybody locked down. Most questions we get asked is when do we stop running calls? 45 miles an hour, sustained winds, we stop running calls. So post-storm, preferably during the daylight, but this is where we work with the sheriff's office, making sure roads are open, down power lines, trees. We try to do it in the daylight if possible. Doesn't always work that way. And like Corey had said, we get Unified Command together to make that decision on when we can and can't open the port. Hazard assessment. So we do a hazard assessment first, down power lines, leaking fuels, anything like that. Mitigate the hazards, then we move to a damage assessment and fix any damages that we got there. So pretty brief, simple. Any questions? Pretty easy. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Chief. And now we're going to pass it over to Commander Byron Keck with Brevard County Sheriff's Office. Again, how the landside operations coincide with waterside operations, and again, a Unified Command partner. So, Commander.
Good morning, and thank you. I'll go through this really fast, so that way they'll leave a few minutes for questions, whether myself or any of the other presenters up here. And then a lot of what you'll see is what we do. Oh gosh, let's see. A lot of what we do, it's kind of already been covered by we're all government agencies. So 72 hours, we're actually starting prior to 72 hours. When something's going on, just because of the uncertainty, we're making logistical plans. But these are just some of the things. We're designating the right people for the right spots, assisting the CPA, all the partners out here, anything we can do to get ready, spreading the word, start attending the meetings. So that one was really fast. But this is probably more important. So 24 hours too. Obviously, AB staffing for us means bringing everybody in. So we get to the point where we make a decision based on the storm conditions if we're going to have everybody come in at once. So there's basically no days off. All the deputies will come in, so we would have double the manpower out here. Our MSOs at 24 hours, we would send them home. They'd be replaced with deputies because obviously we've got double the deputies out here. So they'd be handling any of the access, any of the things that the MSOs would be doing. Now would be handled with the deputies. Our Marine units obviously would start helping out with evacuations, and we'd start putting up our essential equipment, attending meetings, landfall. Obviously, we're going to have personnel at both the IMOC and then also Canaveral Precinct on the south side. So we will have both of those locations staffed. And then post-storm, obviously handling reentry assessments, making sure everything is safe, working with our local partners here. And obviously the biggest goal is to get the waterway back open and get the port back open. So that is it. I will just cover real quick because I know it always comes up in questions, and anybody that's been here for a while, you already know this. If we have some new partners to the area, maybe relocated, bridges did not close prior to storm. So if you are here, 6 hours prior to landfall, if for whatever reason all of a sudden you decided you needed to vacate, I wouldn't recommend it at that point, but the bridges are going to be open, so you can go. The only time they would be closed is post-storm, just for maybe a quick assessment. We've done a real good job in the last few years working with DOT to get the bridges back open. I know one year it was an hour, and they were back open post-storm, because if there's no event really that affects the bridges in infrastructure, then we will just go ahead and open them back up. So we realize everybody wants to get back to work, get back to their homes. So we're very, very sympathetic with that. And so we will get those back open as quick as you can. So that is it. Unless anybody has any questions, I'll be here afterwards. If we don't have time, if you have a question, I'll be here afterwards. Feel free to come over and talk to me, and I'll assist any way we can.
All right, last up, myself. So I'm going to try to wrap it all together and really show what the Port Community, Port Authority Unified Command does with all this information that we've seen from everybody. So again, I'm Corey Dibble. I'm the Director of Safe Security out here. I do emergency management as well. What are we doing right now? This is number one. So first off, what do we do in the off season? Well, we don't just sit there, right? We are all hazards. We have other things to plan for. But in the off season, we're looking at these plans. We're looking at our heavy weather checklist. We're making those updates. So what are we doing right now? Now it's June 1st. We're going to start doing monthly hazard surveys of all the facilities, everything out here. We're going to drive by your area. We're going to look at what needs to be cleaned up. Same thing with us. What are our areas that need to be cleaned up? We want no missile debris, missile hazards out there in the time of increased winds. So what we'll do is we'll go out there. I usually do it in conjunction with the Coast Guard, engineering, Canaveral Fire Rescue. We're all out there. We share this information. We get it to our tenant relations department. They forward off an email to that facility operator and say, hey, you have this. It needs to be cleaned up. We don't want to be cleaning this up when the storm's 72 hours out. We know that is difficult. We know we have lumber throughout this entire port and with broken bales. We want them tied up now. So we need to work on that. We obviously know we don't want to impede commerce, but we need to make sure that we stay organized now in the event that a storm does, like Matthew, form 3 days right off our coast. Make sure your own plans are ready. We heard that multiple times throughout every presentation. Identify your POCs. Darlene's reached out. Who are your critical return personnel? We'll go into that a little bit more later. Make sure your information is up to date. So we're also identifying securing staging locations. I've been working with Chris with Canaveral Fire Rescue with BCSO about where do we put their large equipment. We saw in Fort Myers with Ian how devastating it was. Obviously a Cat 3 or below, they'll have a ride-out team, but anything higher, we need to move that equipment. We don't want to lose a $4.5 million fire truck. Well, it's a large piece of equipment, so where do we put it? So we're identifying those staging locations, working with our stakeholders, our partners. We're doing the same thing with our response equipment. We're working to make sure that we can work with Sea Ray over there so our survey vessel can be staged and ready to deploy after the storm to clear the channel. Working with Shannon in the back with purchasing and risk management. We're ordering supplies. It's a hurricane. We heard Commander Dinino talk about Chef Boyardee. We're making sure we have those supplies. We're making sure we have food. We have water. We have porta-johns on order. We all know when a storm comes through here and there's no water, porta-johns go like that. Well, if I'm expecting us to come back and respond to after a hurricane and get us open as quickly as possible, I need to make sure that these response personnel have the basic amenities to be able to do damage assessment and work, and also to help the port community. Updating mutual aid agreements, huge. After Hurricane Irma, we lost all water. We had a water loss for 2-3 days, intermittent pressure on that third day. Well, we have mutual aid agreements. Canaveral Fire Rescue was able to get 6 water tenders in, so that's basically a truck with a water tank on the back, to be able to support Seaport Canaveral, which runs all fuel operations, because their generator didn't have enough capacity. That's since been rectified. We're good to go. We have mobile generator inbound as well. We're pursuing for a grant. But having that mutual aid was able to open up Seaport Canaveral to get in the #1 priority for the state of Florida after a hurricane is fuel, getting those fuel ships in. And also to receive passenger vessels that were sitting offshore that were people that evaded the storm on the cruise ship that might have been there 3-4 days past due. We couldn't bring them in without a roving fire watch because we had no fire suppression. So making sure that we have mutual aid, generators. I work with Brevard County Emergency Management all the time, making sure that we have those agreements in place. And ensure all vessels are aware of their evacuation requirements. We did a workshop in April. We talked about what your Annex H is. Recreational community, we've had 2 visits with them identifying what they need to do for evacuation of their vessels. So making sure that everybody is aware of what they need to do during a storm. Real quick, we've said this multiple times to the marina contingent, so I just wanted to put this out there. This is our evacuation flow chart. You've heard us talk about Unified Command. Unified Command, again, Canaveral Fire Rescue, Canaveral Port Authority, Customs and Border Patrol, Border Protection, Brevard County Sheriff's Office, and the Coast Guard. We get together, we identify this storm. Tropical cyclone forms, we activate Unified Command. Port Canaveral's in the clear. As it stands, we monitor the storm for changes, because we all know storms change. They speed up, they change track, we know that. Port Canaveral looks to be impacted. We're gonna review this data. If you're familiar with what happened in Ian, we did not order an evacuation of recreational. Again, Coast Guard's 500 gross tons or higher. Port Authority is those under. Coast Guard directs that regardless. So we did not order a recreational evacuation of the harbor during Ian because Unified Command got together and identified that storm surge was not a significant threat because the storm, Ian, was approaching from a west to east. We thought the river would have been worse. Turns out we were correct, so we did not order that. But we did say that every storm is treated different and don't expect that to be the norm. Fast forward, 2 weeks later, we had Nicole. We ordered evacuation before we got into Whiskey because we knew storm surge was a significant threat. So we review that data. If the Unified Command, the port does not issue that evacuation order, all vessels shall follow the guidance and requirements of your marina. Your marina dictates your operations regardless of what we say. And that has since been educated to a lot of the marina operators. And then so on and so forth. Coast Guard obviously directs us. With Whiskey, we've heard about it, Whiskey all the way to Zulu. If we issue a port evacuation order, that's it. Evacuate. And we're going to order that. It can be at any given time. However, we want to give you as much planning timeline as possible. Nicole, we ordered it at 1300 and Whiskey wasn't until 1600 that day. Remaining report request flow chart. I just put this in there because, again, we talked about this in April. You heard LT talk about it. Hurricane season starts, you needed to have your plans in for 500 gross tons or higher. You put that plan in, Coast Guard reviews it, follows up with any other recommendation, other requirements in that plan. Tropical cyclone approaches Florida, Coast Guard issues Whiskey, you need to make sure you have that plan in place. And I want to note, just because you put that plan for remaining port does not mean it's going to be approved. Coast Guard has requirements. The Port Authority, as the facility owner, has to sign off on that as well. So in the event it is not approved, there may be additional requests for more information, and that'll be a conversation with the Port Authority, the entity requesting remain a port, and the Coast Guard. So what are our objectives, priorities pre-storm? Number one, we hear about it. It's life safety. It's protection of property, life safety, and the environment. That's across the board. If you've done any incident command system, that's ICS class. Those are the 3 priorities that transcend any hazard. We're going to activate the heavy weather plan, our heavy weather plan, which is inclusive of checklists. These checklists are very detailed, specific to CPA departments. Everything from does your staff have personal preparedness equipment, all the way to Cody with the harbor master, did you reach out to the commercial fishermen to make sure that they're ready to evacuate? To Corey with public safety, have you reached out to the recreational community to make sure they're ready to evacuate? Very detailed, specific checklists. And activate that Unified Command. Again, Unified Command is what drives our actions here at the port. Tracking the storm, discussing vessel evacuation, as I talked about. We want to make sure we give you as much time as possible to evacuate your vessels. Ensure the port is clear. I'm doing those monthly hazard assessments. I'm doing them monthly, so I'm going to do them in June. You'll see something come through probably if you have an area to be cleaned up from the real estate. I'll do it again in July, all the way through November to make sure that these areas remain clear. Phase closure of port businesses. Again, this is where it differentiates between landside and waterside. The Coast Guard is going to dictate the waterside operations. Landside could be given Brevard County Emergency Management orders an evacuation. We haven't seen an evacuation in Brevard County in probably since, I believe it was Matthew. Other than that, they've been voluntary at this time because of the storms, either west to east approach or because of the lack of, I guess, confidence in the potential of the storm. So that makes it difficult for us. Now, obviously, the port director, port property can order that evacuation, but we focus on that water side and try to coincide them. One thing I do want to identify is just because the Coast Guard has ordered a closure of the waterway does not mean shoreside operations are closed. We will work with Seaport Canaveral about getting those fuel trucks in and out until the truck, which is a private operator, does not feel comfortable enough coming across that causeway. I believe it was Irma, we were able to push through over 510 trucks within the last 12 hours prior to Azulu. So that hits the next topic, continuous fuel deliveries. We want to make sure that we get that fuel vessel in. Coast Guard's going to work at that. Captain of the Port's going to look at that risk-based model. We all know when there's a storm and there is an evacuation order, what's the number one issue that we have when it's time for re-entry? It's fuel. So we want to make sure that we have fuel tanks here and we get the fuel into either prior to the storm, to the pumps, or right after. And then we have a ride-out team. If the Canaveral Fire Rescue and Brevard County Sheriff's Office feel comfortable enough, it's usually about a 3 or under. We'll have a ride-out team. But just because they're first responders doesn't mean we want to put them in life's danger if we have a significant storm. And I believe the Coast Guard will have a ride-out team as well, depending for search and rescue operations. And then notifying critical return members what to expect. If you are a critical return member, you know where you're at on that list. Darlene's reached out to you. I'll send out that message to that A team, that damage assessment team prior to us departing, to just an expectation. Hey, we expect the storm to depart at X time on this day. Be ready for a recall. Post-storm, picture over there is just a little snapshot of some channel survey. Number one, life safety, windshield assessment is what it's called with the quotations, windshield assessment. Canaveral Fire Rescue, Chief Quinn and Commander Keck talked about it. They drive around as soon as those winds subside. They give us a quick identification, same thing with Coast Guard. Hey, we see no power lines, we see no life safety issues. We feel comfortable enough for you to call your recall team. I'm going to then get that information. I'm going to recall the damage assessment team, which is going to come in here, do a quick assessment of port operations, facilities. Number one, dispatch that survey vessel. Again, we are very proactive here at the Port Authority. We have a continuing contract that we purchase, that we pay for to make sure that we can clear the channel as quickly as possible. We're not waiting for the Army Corps because we understand that that is a tiered system that is prioritized depending on the severity of who's impacted the most. So yes, we like having that resource, but we make sure that we are ahead of the curve and we take care of ourselves here because we all know you don't want to be waiting on the federal government for support. You're only as resilient as your community. Dispatch that response equipment, more so than the survey vessel, making sure that it's response personnel. Irma, we had to have a fire pump brought in that was 10,000 gallons per minute to make sure that we could support Seaport Canaveral. What did we do after that? We went ahead and purchased that equipment, so we have that on site, making sure that we are self-sufficient and we can dispatch that equipment when needed. Receive fuel ships. As soon as the Coast Guard gets clear data, as you can see right here, that we don't have significant shoaling, again with Cody in the back as well as the harbor master and the pilots doing ATON checks, making sure that we're all on board. We all agree, getting this information unified command saying we feel comfortable, we can bring in XYZ ships. Coast Guard is going to take that information and give us a full opening. Usually within the first 24, 48 hours, it's opening with restrictions, meaning maybe a vessel that drafts too much can't come in. Still, the number one priority that transcends any agency is the fuel ship. From DOT to the Coast Guard, state of Florida, it's fuel ship. Then it's to get those passenger ships that have been offshore. Any other survey needs within the port community? What does our port community need, right? Getting out into the community, what happened to your facilities? What do you need? And then a big focus is we've had everybody evacuate. Now, how do we get them back in? How do we re-enter? How do we have re-entry for the commercial fishermen, the recreational community? So a lot of coordination with the drawbridge saying, all right, we have ordered that evacuation. I've coordinated now this with Cody to the commercial fishermen that we want you to come back on this day, and we're going to do 30-minute increments on the bridge. That way it doesn't impact the Space Force operations, but we make sure that we get the commercial fishermen and any large recreational vessels back into the port, again, to restart commerce and to make sure that everybody is impacted as little as possible. And I've said it before, I said it right there, is be proactive, not reactive. Resiliency is the buzzword across every agency right now, and we can't be resilient without everybody in this room taking this information from the National Weather Service, everybody getting out into the community and talking to one another, doing what we're going to do in the next 5 minutes for the Harbor Safety Committee. Be resilient, take care of yourself, take care of your community as we're trying to do. So I'd like to say thank you for me, and I'll leave it to, if you want a question, we have to use the microphone. I'll leave it up if there are any questions for any of the presenters. With that, I'd like to say thank you. We're going to do a quick 5-minute break, and anyone that's staying for the Port Canaveral Harbor Safety Committee, after 5 minutes, use the restroom. We'll start back up. Thank you all for coming. Quiet hurricane season.